Hey, I'm Olive, your host here at Versus, and today we have a very exciting camera comparison for you between the Vivo X100 Pro, the OnePlus 12, the Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra, and the Oppo Find X7 Ultra. We're going to be testing them in various categories such as standard, wide photos, and even macro photos to see what these bad boys can do. So without further ado, let's get testing. As always, we will start with standard wide photos as we feel this is the mode people will use most frequently. Starting off with an image of the Berlin National Gallery, at first glance, all the photos look almost identical. But if you look closely, you can see that there are minor differences, such as the Galaxy's contrast being too low, whilst the OnePlus is a tad too high. But overall, all of them are totally usable, so it'll have to be a draw. In this next photo, the OnePlus for sure gets the best photo, as the image has the perfect amount of contrast, as well as exposure and color accuracy. The Oppo is far too overexposed, and the Samsung a tad too underexposed. The reason Vivo will get second place is because I do like the warm hue of the OnePlus slightly more. Here, although the OnePlus has exposed my features pretty well, it has also overexposed the background. The purple lighting has almost fully disappeared, which is not what we want. The rest of the devices all performed relatively well, with the Oppo perhaps desaturating the color slightly and the Galaxy exposing the image. I would say the Vivo does the best at balancing all the aspects out, which gives the image the right amount of exposure and the best color accuracy. Okay, I'm not sure what's happening to the Galaxy, but it's gone a little crazy. Way too overexposed. I personally really like the photo coming from the Vivo as it's exposed well and has a bit of a cool tone. However, the image is slightly over-sharpened, which may not be everyone's favorite. The OnePlus, on the other hand, gives off a very natural photo with the right amount of sharpness. But in the end, both images are pretty great, and it comes down to personal preference. When it comes to low light photos, I don't think any of the phones did particularly well, but I have to give top points to Vivo. It somehow managed to reduce the harsh shadows on my face while still keeping a nice, deep contrast and minimizing extreme warm hues. The Galaxy has also done a decent job, as I'm for sure well exposed, but the overall image is a tad too warm for my liking. I'd say the OnePlus and the Oppo had extremely similar outcomes with shadows that are far too harsh. Here I actually think the Oppo gives the most natural looking photo, however, the color accuracy is slightly off as the entire image has a pretty blue hue. The Galaxy gives a nice warm hue with decent coloring, but perhaps my face is a tad too saturated. But I still think it delivered the most pleasant photo of them all. Between the OnePlus and the Vivo, I'd say the OnePlus gives us slightly more realistic colors, as the Vivo has a not so nice yellow tone to it, particularly noticeable in the lights above. Unfortunately, for some reason, the audio didn't work here, but basically, I was saying let's move on to ultrawide photos, which are perfect for capturing more of the scenery around you. In this first photo, Vivo takes first place for its nice exposure and vibrant colors. All the other devices perform relatively similar, with all just having slight color alterations, so it'll be a draw between them. Next, I'd say that the Galaxy performs best, as it has the most accurate coloring and the exposure is well balanced. It also has the most detail, especially if you take a look at the trees in the back. Between the other three, the OnePlus also provides nice background details with a slightly higher contrast. The Oppo is a tad overexposed when it comes to my features, but overall, it's not a bad shot. Finally, the Vivo has the lowest contrast and the shadows are a little bit too lifted, which leaves the photo looking slightly washed out. Under direct light, the Galaxy actually handles this very well. The white balance is spot on and the shadows aren't harsh on my face. The Vivo, on the other hand, has completely failed with the white balance, as the image is completely yellow. I'd say the Oppo does better than the OnePlus, at least in terms of shadows, as the OnePlus's shadows are a bit too harsh for my liking. The coloring isn't ideal though. I actually like all of these photos, and I think all the devices did a pretty good job. The Vivo and Oppo stand out the most to me, as I do really love the deep blacks the contrast is giving, while still making sure the image is lit well. The Galaxy has good exposure, however if you look closely at the darker areas, you do see quite a bit of noise, which isn't ideal. However, the OnePlus is giving off a yellowish hue, which I don't love, and it's actually not as sharp as the others. Ultrawide in low light was an interesting one. All the devices definitely struggled here, but the Vivo stands out as it's the only one that managed to actually get things right. The Galaxy failed to expose the image enough, leaving it fairly dark with a slight blue hue, which leaves me looking a little washed out. Oof, the OnePlus and the Oppo are shook. These photos are both a disaster as everything is wrong about them, and I don't personally think that one is better than the other. Vivo definitely takes the crown here as it delivered a great photo. I haven't got any remarks, to be honest. The Galaxy has also done a decent job as the photo looks very natural, although I would have liked a slightly deeper contrast to make those blacks pop a little more. Interestingly enough, the OnePlus has gone slightly too warm and a little too orange, but the Oppo on the other hand has gone down the blue hue route, which just looks bad. The shadows are also much too harsh, especially around my face. Let's move on to portrait mode, and you may already know this is my favorite. So let's see which one of these bad boys has the best edge detection. You know what? Vivo is really starting to impress me. It has done a phenomenal job at edge detection. It looks absolutely seamless, although the colors aren't quite right. Based on what's deemed nicer coloring, I'd say the Galaxy has nailed it here. My face is exposed well, and the saturation is just the right amount to make me look fresh and alive without resulting in a fake or filter-like image. Between the Oppo and the OnePlus, I'd say that the Oppo has better edge detection, whilst the OnePlus has done better with the warmth and coloring. It's a difficult one, but since I look quite washed out on the Oppo, I have to give the point to the OnePlus. In this next photo, it's clear that Vivo is the winner. It's absolutely aced it with smooth edge detection, nice coloring, and the right amount of sharpness. The Galaxy has also performed well and looks very natural. Only its edge detection is a little off, especially noticeable at the top of my head. The OnePlus has also done a decent job with natural looking edge detection and a slightly warmer hue. Oppo is looking a little bit too soft for my liking as it's missing that sharpness, especially in my eyes. It's also gone down the pale route and makes me look washed out, which I don't love. Edge detection wise though, it's done a pretty good job. At first glance, all of the phones have done a great job at edge detection, but when taking a closer look at other aspects, I'd say the Vivo stands out to me the most. The saturation is great, as well as the exposure, although the lighting wasn't great in this cafe. However, that doesn't mean it has the best photo. In my opinion, the Oppo has the most natural looking image. The OnePlus is definitely a better representation of how the lighting was in reality, and unfortunately it wasn't able to do much to improve the exposure. Samsung also did a decent job and has nice exposure, but the colors are a little too desaturated for my liking, hence why I prefer the image coming from the Oppo. As always, we love to do a little blind test where we ask you which one of these photos you like the best, and the winner was Vivo. Honestly, Vivo is killing it, and it's actually making me consider getting myself a Vivo phone. We 100% agree with you. The photo coming from the Vivo is great. The colors are nice and saturated, and the overall image has superb edge detection. The Oppo follows right behind as it also produced an outstanding photo. The tone is a little warmer than that of the Vivo with slightly deeper contrast, so it's really down to personal preference. And the OnePlus and Samsung tied in last place. Both decent photos with not much to complain about. Low light is never easy, but the Galaxy has done a pretty good job here. It's looking very natural with nice exposure and a slight warm tone. The Vivo has also managed to expose the photo well enough whilst keeping those nice deep blacks. The OnePlus and Oppo performed very similarly, with the OnePlus having slightly better color accuracy. In this next image, it really comes down to personal preference. If you're looking for your subject to be decently exposed, then the Galaxy would be your choice. However, the Galaxy's image is a tad overexposed, therefore some background details are lost. The Vivo, on the other hand, has maintained all of its background details while still exposing the subject well enough. Once again, the Oppo and the OnePlus look very similar and both have come out looking okay, but a little too dark for my preference. Now let's move on to video, as for me this is super crucial when choosing which phone to go for. This one's a tough one, because initially I thought it's gotta be the Galaxy, as it has nice deep blacks, the right amount of exposure, and it's sharp. But then I rewatched the video and noticed that it's a bit too sharp. It's a little overpowering, but then again I still think it does the best job. The Vivo does have that cinematic smoothness to it, but it's a tad too much. The OnePlus is overexposed, leaving the footage looking washed out, and the Oppo is decent with the right amount of sharpness and has nice coloring, but I do also think it's a little overexposed, similarly to the OnePlus. In this next video, I'd say the Vivo and the Samsung perform similarly, with the colors being a bit of a cooler hue, whereas the OnePlus and the Oppo give off a warmer hue. I have to be honest, this lighting is horrible, but the Oppo does seem to have slightly better exposure, especially when it comes to my features. Then comes the OnePlus due to its warmer hue, followed by a tie between the Vivo and the Galaxy. Okay, this one was a difficult one, as in my opinion, all of the phones struggle to some extent. The Galaxy does stand out as having the most natural look and well-maintained exposure throughout. It's actually not a bad video considering the conditions. It's really hard to choose between the rest. The Vivo has a very greenish hue with harsh shadows that's not a vibe at all. The OnePlus is far too blue, but it does have pretty good exposure. And the Oppo is looking quite blue but also underexposed. So I suppose just because of its decent exposure, the OnePlus will come second, followed by a draw between the Vivo and the Oppo. In ultra-wide video outdoors, all the devices perform well under natural daylight. The Vivo and the Galaxy both look great as they have a good amount of saturation, whilst looking the most natural. The OnePlus and the Oppo both have very high contrast, which can be nice, but can also sometimes lose some details. In this next video, all phones seem to struggle under artificial lighting, causing flickering, but the Samsung does handle it best and has the least amount of it. The Vivo does the best at exposing the shot, but it does also crop in the most. The Oppo's coloring is pretty accurate and the exposure is decent, if only the flickering were a little less. Unfortunately, the OnePlus has not only the most extreme flickering, but also the shadows are far too harsh and the contrast far too deep. Whoa, okay, these results are all over the place. Although the OnePlus does have the best exposure and a nice warm tone, the Galaxy does look the most natural with the least amount of noise. But as always, it all comes down to personal preference. For me, it's the OnePlus. Both the Vivo and the Oppo do very poorly, with the Oppo's white balance being completely off. It's far too blue and in my opinion, not usable at all.
So it is finally time for some stabilization testing, which is very crucial when you're trying to capture the best video. So let's test them out and see who can stabilize the best.
In standard mode, when running with all four devices, the Galaxy for sure has the smoothest stabilization. I'd say the Oppo also does okay, but it's not ideal as you can see some distortion. Same goes with the OnePlus, and the Vivo is definitely struggling the most. With active stabilization on, and once again I'm running, the Galaxy does a pretty outstanding job if you ask me. It's interesting because the other devices seem to struggle even more when active stabilization is on. The Vivo seems to do a slightly better job than the Oppo as it maintains the sharpness of the video, whereas the Oppo becomes mega blurry and distorted throughout. But wow, the OnePlus. It's really going through it. Looks absolutely awful and the footage is completely unusable.
So I think it is time for some selfies. I'm very excited to see how each one of these is going to perform. I'm also going to test out the front cameras and see how those perform as well whilst I'm at it, plus some audio.
As you already know, when it comes to selfies, I'm real picky. But I actually think all of the devices have done really well here. The Galaxy and the Vivo are sharper than the other two, with the Galaxy also having better coloring and exposure. The OnePlus and the Vivo are incredibly similar, but unfortunately the OnePlus has failed to remain sharp. The Oppo also has issues with its sharpening, but the colors are more vibrant, helping to make me look lively. In this next selfie, all of the devices had almost identical results, with only the OnePlus being slightly more pale. So it's a draw here between the other three. In this last selfie, the Vivo has given us the most natural looking photo for sure. The Galaxy has done that thing again where it gives me a weird smooth filter look, which I personally think tends to look a little fake. It does have nice exposure though. The OnePlus has a nice warm tone, but unfortunately the image has come out slightly blurry. Oppo is also looking a bit blurry and far too cold toned for my liking. Moving on to front camera video, the results were very interesting to say the least. I have to choose the Galaxy here as I feel it's given us the most accurate colors and also has a decent exposure without coming across as overexposed. It could use a little bit of a deeper contrast though. Vivo has a nice warm hue, whereas the OnePlus is missing this and it's also underexposed. On the other hand, the Oppo is far too overexposed with extremely heightened highlights, which isn't giving it a great look.
So starting with the Vivo X100 Pro, this is what the built-in microphone sounds like. Moving on to the OnePlus 12, here is how the built-in microphone sounds like on this device. Then we have the Galaxy S24 Ultra. How is the built-in microphone sounding like here? Someone's angry. And finally, we have the Oppo Find X7 Ultra. How is the built-in microphone on this little bad boy?
I personally love the sound coming from the Vivo. I think it's crisp and clear and overall just sounds really good. The OnePlus and the Galaxy have more muted audio with better noise cancellation abilities, but I have to say that I also really enjoy the audio coming from the Oppo. It's a tad more muted than the Vivo, but still remains very crisp and clear.
Alright you guys, it is finally time to have some fun with slow-mo. The Galaxy S24 Ultra can now record in 120 FPS in 4K, but let's see how the others will compare to it.
When it comes to slow-mo, the Galaxy S24 Ultra can now shoot up to 4K, which is unreal. So of course it's no question that it has the best video outcome. All of the others can shoot up to 1080p, and we started the test with 480 frames per second, but 240 frames per second for the Galaxy, as it does not go higher than that. Apart from Vivo being slightly more cropped, I'd say all the devices have equally good slow motion abilities. Of course, neither of them is very sharp, but that's due to the resolution they're shooting in. At 240 frames per second, with the Galaxy at 120 frames per second, I'd say all the devices perform almost identical, with the Vivo being a tiny bit more exposed than the rest. They all caught the coins falling out of my jacket perfectly. Of course, we are excluding the Galaxy here as it obviously has the best results, so naturally it's taking first place.
It's really tricky to get nice and detailed zoom shots, as a lot of the time you do lose a lot of the detail and the image just becomes blurry. So let's see which one of these devices can take the best zoom shot and how far can they zoom in.
At 3x zoom, the Vivo is looking the sharpest, but all of the photos look decent. At 5x zoom, the Vivo and OnePlus are looking sharp and have a nice contrast, whereas the Galaxy and the OnePlus remain soft. At 10x zoom, the Galaxy and the Oppo look very similar. The OnePlus is giving a very soft finish, and the Vivo is still looking the sharpest with the best overall exposure. At 30x zoom is where things get interesting. Both the Vivo and the Galaxy look sharp, with the Vivo taking it that extra mile. It seems the OnePlus is starting to really struggle here, and the Oppo is doing okay, but nothing spectacular. However, at 100x zoom, Oppo steps up its game. It's definitely looking the best with a nice deep contrast, which definitely helps bring out the details, although the image is not exactly sharp. The rest look meh, so-so, with the OnePlus performing the worst.
Oh, this is so incredible, you guys. There is so much history within these walls. Let's see if we can really capture the texture of the walls with macro mode.
I always find macro photos super fascinating. In this first one, Vivo gets the win because it looks overall the sharpest, even though, okay, its coloring is slightly off. The OnePlus has good contrast and depth, so I do really like that shot. Half of Samsung's image is blurry and half of it is sharp, so it's a tough call. The Oppo also looks a little too soft, which loses some of its details. Here, the Galaxy has the most accurate coloring, as that was the actual color of the wall, so it's interesting to see every other device getting it wrong. It's also looking nice and sharp. The Vivo is also looking good and super sharp, whilst the OnePlus and the Oppo had similar results that aren't as sharp as I'd like them to be. This last image is a tough one, because apart from the Samsung being a little off with the coloring, the rest of the images are almost identical with minor differences. I'd say the Vivo has the most natural look and is also nice and sharp. The OnePlus is slightly more exposed with higher saturation and contrast, but still looking good. The Oppo is on the softer side with a slightly duller look. So finally, let's summarize each category and see who the winners are. For standard photos, the Vivo comes in first place, followed by a draw between the OnePlus and the Galaxy in second place, leaving the Oppo in third place. Next we have ultra-wide photos, where the Galaxy actually takes first place. This is starting to become quite a habit for the Galaxy, as we have witnessed the same thing in past comparisons. It is followed by the Vivo in second place, the Oppo in third place, and finally the OnePlus in last place. In portrait mode, the Vivo takes first place, then comes the Galaxy with just 1 point less, followed by the Oppo, and unfortunately the OnePlus has ended up in last place. In videos using the back cameras, the Galaxy takes first place, followed by a draw between the Vivo and the OnePlus, which leaves the Oppo in last place. When it comes to stabilization, the Galaxy takes first place once again, followed by a draw between the Vivo and the Oppo, then in last place comes the OnePlus. For front camera photos, the Vivo and the Galaxy draw in first place with 11 points each, followed by the Oppo in second place, and then the OnePlus with just 1 point less coming in last place. With front camera video, the Galaxy takes first place, followed by the Vivo, then the OnePlus, and finally the Oppo in last place. But when it comes to audio, the Vivo takes the win, followed by the Galaxy in second place, and then we have the Oppo, and lastly the OnePlus. Slow-mo goes to the Galaxy due to its impeccable 4K abilities, and then all three phones draw in second place. Interestingly enough, the Vivo won in the zoom category, then comes the Oppo, then the Galaxy, and lastly the OnePlus. And finally, in macro photos, the Vivo comes in first place, the OnePlus comes in second place, the Galaxy comes in third place, and that leaves the Oppo in last place. So that pretty much sums up these 4 different phones. We hope you found this review useful, and we would love to hear your thoughts. Which one would you choose? Let us know in the comments down below. I'm honestly considering getting myself the Vivo X100 Pro because it did an insanely good job in a lot of the categories. As always, give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to be a part of our Versus community if you aren't already. As always, we have all of these devices linked in the description down below, so you can find direct links there. With that being said, we will see you in the next video, and until then, take care!